Hello, everyone. And on behalf of Group D, welcome to week 4's reading. The reading is going to be Inside Lives, Psychoanalysis and the Growth of the Personality. We will be covering chapter 5 today. This book is by Margot Waddell. They are a fellow of the British Psychoanalytical Society, so they're informed by Western thought models. About the book is it was published in 2002. The main focus of this chapter is going to be on early childhood weaning and separation, and how the child is essentially moving from infancy to young childhood, and the kind of attachment that they feel with their parents and how their sense of self shifts as that attachment bond changes. So we'll be thinking of the parent through a lens in which they can either facilitate insight in their child or kind of impede or hold back their child from self-growth, discovery, and development. So the way that this would be addressed in therapy when there are issues around it is by setting goals towards self-knowledge and integration and really facilitating that growth in the child from infancy to a young child who's discovering themselves. So weaning usually occurs, at least in the United States, during the baby's first year. This can differ across different cultures around the globe and their practices when it comes to breastfeeding. So weaning can be very exciting for babies in that they get to try something new. They love to explore. They get to try new foods, a new mechanism of a new sensory mechanism that can come from feeding from a cup. That's different from breastfeeding or a bottle. However, this process is also associated with the death or the lack of breast or bottle that they have become very used to. So at the same time, it can be a very frightening and anxiety-inducing experience. This is kind of when the child starts to realize that they and their mother are not the same person, and that the mother is an external figure from their self. So their sense of self is actually changing very rapidly in a way that can be very disorienting and often upsetting. So this is the first time they're kind of physically learning that they are physically separate from their mother. At the same time, their sense of self and well-being are tied up with the mother. And so that makes this transitional period all the more important. Freud's Oedipus complex is thought to be connected to this phase of development. And Freud was very interested in people understanding themselves and understanding all of those things under the tip of the iceberg that had happened to them in early childhood. And so the weaning and separation kind of fall under this umbrella of childhood influences that could unconsciously be affecting adult behaviors. And according to Freud, this could even be linked to adult behaviors like murder and incest. So pretty important period. So next, we're going to talk about how mourning is related to development. This can seem kind of counterintuitive. Mourning is usually associated with death, and in Western culture, life and death are usually seen as opposites, with one preceding the other and no overlap in between. However, in this psychological lens, weaning can be a sort of metaphorical death. It's the loss of their identity. They start to feel separate from their mother. Their sense of self is challenged. And it's the death of the experience of breastfeeding or bottle feeding. Similarly, there can be metaphorical weaning, where there's the death of an identity, such as when a mother decides to have a child when they already have a toddler. That toddler can start to experience more separation from their parents as they come to accept that a new family member will be joining the picture and taking up a lot of their parents' time and attention that was typically reserved for them. Similarly, with children who have experienced difficulties or trauma, where they feel separate from their parent. For example, if they started their infancy in the hospital or had severe challenges that made them have a neurobiological or developmental difference. Weaning can be another step where, if not facilitated correctly, they further retreat into themselves and feel unsupported by their parents and then by extension, the world later on. So this can result in acting out and then violent tendencies even, if not addressed properly. And this mourning is never something that's ever strictly resolved because it happens at every stage of development. So, a metaphor that was coming to mind for me is the idea of clothing and how, as you progress developmentally, you can't fit into the same clothes that you wore before. And continuously, we're trying on these new clothes, trying on these new identities. And at the same time, we have to discard and we have to let go of past identities and things that no longer fit for us. So, in that sense, it's an ongoing process.
So one way for infants to navigate separation anxiety and mourning is through the use of symbols through play. This can be seen in the case of Nick, who at 22 months old is beginning to wean away from breastfeeding and also beginning a transition from being the only child to becoming a big brother. His parents are also experiencing a sense of loss and guilt due to these impending changes on their day-to-day life. Nick's relationship with his mother begins to change, and he starts addressing her by her first name the way that his father does. He also begins to acquire new words and skills, feeling the need to grow up and make space for the new baby. As Nick's needs are increasingly becoming overlooked by his parents, he becomes more skilled at winning his mother's attention. He also begins channeling his feelings of anger and frustration into play. One day, while playing with a train, he discards the engine, which symbolizes getting rid of his father, and he then proclaims himself as the king of the castle. Through mourning the disregarded train, he seeks for symbolic replacements through other toys, but these prove ineffective as he is seeking the reassurance from the original engine, which is representative of his father. Nick is beginning to seek control through play and the use of symbols to represent his mom and dad and their togetherness as a family. He also begins to incorporate his own symbolic toy as well to avoid feeling excluded as he's expecting a new baby sibling. In conclusion, weaning and separation are a natural occurrence as the infant begins to gain a sense of self separate from the mother. The Oedipus complex highlights harmful impulses and defenses that may arise within the infant's fear for survival and separation from the mother. The mother often feels a sense of loss as well as the baby starts to become independent from them. The development of defense mechanisms for protection can include denial, projection, and/or splitting, and the distinction between self and mother creates a sense of loss and fear in the infant. So they may use external symbols as a way to navigate these feelings and express their fears. Mourning and emotional development are closely linked and occur in different ways throughout the course of one's life. Thank you.